All right, you guys. So welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about if pesticides are safe on your food and if organic food is BS. So there are a tremendous amount of data influencers or data-driven influencers online that do put out a lot of content claiming that pesticides are safe and it's not a big deal because they're safe under industry standards or they're like 100 times smaller than what's allowed by industry standards. Also, kind of claiming like there is really no big difference between organic food and non-organic food, and that it's totally fine. It's totally fine to buy food that's sprayed with various synthetic biocides or pesticides, as they're referred to as. You guys have to remember, like a lot of these data influencers, their whole entire brand is built off using data research or finding scientific studies to come to a specific conclusion. And this does add a lot of credibility to especially, the sheep, because they think science is some kind of like magic fairy thing that happens in the clouds that no one has access to, et cetera, et cetera. And somehow they're like the priests, that are able to communicate to the truth of through these studies. There's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of shortcomings with studies as well. And just for a lot of people, like, hey, you can get access to all of these studies on PubMed.gov as well, or various other sites that are part of like a public domain. So it's not like a mystery to be able to find them. And it really isn't that hard to learn how to read scientific literature either. And even if you can't or don't have the time to, you could always go to upwork.com or something of that sort and just hire like a PhD either in the States or overseas and have them read over it. And in fact, hire a couple of different ones and have them individually give you a synopsis of their opinions on it. And then you can come to a conclusion on it as well. So it's not like anything crazy. I mean, it is one tool in a toolbox of a myriad of tools that should be used to kind of look at a problem from a myriad of different vantage points and then come to a conclusion, okay? So forgive me, I haven't used PowerPoint in a long time, so I might be a little bit sketchy here. And I'm also using Loom here to record. So here are the things I'm going to touch on. So a lot of these data influencers are claiming that the data shows it's safe, pesticides are safe, but this is not accurate. And I can't believe it's, again, 2025 and I have to cover this information because people that are in the industry, they've already known that it's complete formulations of pesticides, no biocides, no herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, et cetera, et cetera. Complete formulations are never tested for safety. And this is so important to understand because inevitably it's the complete formulation that's actually used on your food that then you end up consuming, not the active ingredient in isolation on its own. Now, these data influencers, they may let me see here. They may know this, but are not presenting it. My theory, and this is just my opinion, is they're not aware of it because they have no on-site experience in this. Like, I don't think, based on what they're saying, in my opinion, they have any farming experience whatsoever. They're just reading literature paper and then drawing some conclusions based on that, and not actually going into the field and seeing how it's used out in the field. And I also believe that they're just copying each other's information. Like one of the popular influencers will post a topic, it starts trending, and then the under siblings and the other parrots, they kind of just say the same exact thing and maybe find one extra study just to kind of stand out a little bit more from one another. But you can look at their pages and they're saying roughly all the same things at roughly all the same times, so anyways, but here's the thing. They're claiming that safety testing has been done. Well, it's not true. No safety testing has been done in complete formulations. I also think there's a lot of confusion around dose makes the poison, and maybe for some biocides that is the case, but there are over 600 biocides on the market where that isn't the case. And I'm actually gonna dive into that in this presentation as well. And again, the main thing is their risk assessment data is based off studies that are done in controlled settings, not out in the field. So this is important too, to consider that the risk assessments aren't reflective of how real life actually works, okay? And the fourth thing is the importance of not taking money from companies that contribute to health problems, unsustainable farming practices, consolidation, world hunger. This is so important, especially for people in the health field. They should not be taking money from soda companies or pesticide companies and stuff of that sort. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. You got into the health field to help heal the world. And a lot of these companies are just creating more hunger, misery, obesity, and disease, okay? So let's go ahead and the next topic here. So my name is Eugene Trufkin, and I've been in healthcare for give or take indirectly and directly for about 40 years. I'm going to be 40 here in about a month or so. And my journey started a long time ago when I was raised on an off-grid biodynamic farm by my grandmother in Ukraine. And back then it was still the USSR. So biodynamic farming is something I've been promoting for many years already here in the States. But for the listeners that don't know what it is, it's probably what you have a mental image of when you think of farming. So like a lot of different animals, a lot of different crops, no chemicals being used, no antibiotics, beta agonists, steroids, genetically modified organisms, additive preservatives, et cetera, okay? And that's kind of what I grew up in. And that's all I knew. And when I came to the US, because I was naive, I just thought everyone kind of farmed that way. And that's the only way food was grown because that's all I was exposed to. I'm going to move around this little thing here. And that's all I was exposed to. And, I would go to Costco and, you see the 50 eggs for like $5 or whatever. And you think, oh, these eggs have been, fully pasture raised and not fed any corn and soy and just out in nature all day 24/7, or these crops have been grown, without spraying with various chemicals or whatever. And I ate that food for many, many years and not even thinking twice about it. And eventually I ran into a presentation just randomly on YouTube titled Nutrition, the Dirt Facts, which you can see right here. And it was presented by a guy named Paul Chek. And he covered like a few different topics, the failing American healthcare system, the normalization of mental and physical disease in American culture as well. But the bigger endpoint was he was comparing industrial agriculture, which is, heavily dependent on various biocides, all sorts of chemicals, monocropping, unsustainable farming practices. And he was comparing it to biodynamic farming, which is what my grandmother did in Ukraine and what I grew up with. And at that point, it was just kind of like a light bulb moment for me. And I immediately started, it came off that, maybe the food I'm eating isn't grown the same way that my grandmother grew it, And that's how my investigation began. And it first started with just trying to figure out how to buy healthy eggs in America, which I thought, honestly, as a certified nutritionist, as this health coach, I'm like, man, this is just going to take like 1 week and I'm going to solve this problem. And that's it, And it wasn't the case. And it took actually me many, many years of investigating this matter, and especially getting through all the greenwashing, all the labels, what all they mean, and then finding out that a lot of them may not live up to those claims as well. And there's a lot of nuance from label to label, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up, volunteering on various ranches. So here I'm at 5 Bar Beef, like the number 5, which is a legitimate 100% grass-fed operation for cattle, okay? And he basically raises wild cattle, so they're out in the field their whole entire life. They're never put into pens or condensed environments or anything of that sort. The interesting story behind Frank Fitzpatrick, which is one of my mentors actually, is he started his herd of cattle like 30 years ago. And basically, he let the weak cattle just die off gradually, and only the strong cattle that were able to survive in that environment were able to reproduce. And fast forward 30 years later, I mean, he has a herd that's very, very healthy, doesn't need any vaccines, medications, antibiotics, beta agonists, steroids, et cetera, et cetera. And they're thriving. And they're out in the pasture 24/7. Doesn't horn them or doesn't dehorn them, doesn't clip the bulls either, or doesn't do any altercations or anything of that sort. They're just literally wild cattle, extremely healthy. So I learned a lot about sustainable planned grazing with cattle through Frank Fitzpatrick by working with him in Orange County. I also got a chance to volunteer at Bluebird Canyon Farms, and I want to thank them for allowing me to do that in Laguna Beach. It's a biodynamic farm in Laguna Beach. And then also happy-hens.com, where I learned a lot about pastured egg laying operations, okay? That they have like a great operation. Their hens are not corn and soy fed. They have like a tremendous amount of room. They're rotated onto new pasture every single day, et cetera, et cetera. Then I worked at a few other places as well. And it ended up resulting in me writing the Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. And it basically outlines my experience and journey of how to find all this food and how to find all this healthy and nutritious food in the US, which is unfortunately not that easy to do. But once you know what to look for, it's still available. But because of all the greenwashing, especially, it's not as easy as you think. So my hopes with the book was just to basically fast forward, years and years and years of research, reading God knows how many books, interviewing a tremendous amount of people in the industry as well, into a quick 1 hour read, so people can gain all the benefit of that knowledge without even needing to invest so much time. But if you're into it, I would recommend you go volunteer at these various operations and learn hands-on as well. But eventually I got on a bunch of podcasts to help promote biodynamic farming, and I'm so thankful for all the hosts for helping me as well. And that helped lead me to a research project with Jason Runtree, which ended up being a good mentor for me and a good friend even to this day at Michigan State University, okay? So let me see here. So another thing is I graduated from the University of California, Irvine. And I kind of want to give a special shout out to one of my role models, and that's Donald Hoffman. And he introduced me to a humble understanding of the scientific method and to understand its limits, especially, okay? And he also introduced me to one of my passion projects even to this day, and that's studying human consciousness. So I'm thankful he actually became quite popular recently. He was on the Lex Friedman podcast, one of my favorite episodes of his. I think it was at 10 million views last time I checked. And I would highly recommend you check it out. And his work influenced my critical eye towards the scientific method. So I just want to give him a special shout out here. And let's go ahead and go over what these data influencers are saying, and then we'll kind of break it down step by step, and you can make the best decision for yourself.
I would never touch an inorganic fruit because fruits absorb pesticides and herbicides and insecticides through their skin. There was a recent study published about inorganic strawberries where they actually took inorganic strawberries from the supermarket, brought them home, put them in a commercial press, pressed the juice out of them, and there was so much pesticide in the juice they were able to take that juice and respray the crop.
Whoa, that's nasty.
And still have the same level of pesticide protection from the juice that was squeezed from inorganic.
So I asked Gary to cite his source to verify whether what he said was true. Time school. And lo and behold, he cites this blog, which doesn't even use the correct acronym for the Environmental Working Group. What on earth is the EMG? And the entire blog only cites one study on Chinese farmers applying pesticides to their crops. I'm sorry, what have Chinese farmers spraying crops got anything to do with you in the US consuming fruits? And this make-believe study about strawberries containing so much pesticide that you can juice them and respray the crop is simply ridiculous. This is who you're taking health advice from, really. Biohacker in the bio. And just to make it clear, organic fruits are not pesticide free. They simply use pesticides from natural sources, which tells us precisely nothing about whether they're less toxic. In reality, these natural pesticides have far less data on their safety. But let's be real here, the pesticide data program actually shows that over 99% of the samples tested had pesticide residues below the EPA's allowable level. And the allowable level is safe by a factor of 100, meaning it's 100 times smaller than the amount required for a negative health effect. Just eat your fruit and veg. Class dismissed.
All right, guys. So let's cover this really quick. Okay, there are a few topics there he mentioned. I mean, I'm not supporting Gary Brecker by doing this here. I'm just kind of using that as an example video. So in terms of his comments regarding Chinese farmers, a lot of food products are imported from China to the US. So it does apply to the US market. But you mentioned, like, what does it have to do with the US market? Well, there's a lot of actually food that comes from China and is used in the US market, including raw ingredients for various supplements. So another thing he mentioned is right over here. Let's come over here. So pesticide data program. So he quoted them a lot. So here's the thing. What he's saying is, the way he's implying it is, these pesticides or biocides, or whatever you want to refer them to, are thoroughly tested for safety. That's kind of how it comes off to me, okay? And that's probably how it comes off to pretty much the majority of his listeners. The thing is no biocides are tested for safety as complete formulations. And here's how it is. So complete formulations is like the average person would think, like how these safety testing tests are done is they get like the full product, which is like what you would see here at Home Depot. They spray that on a particular food of some sort. They have maybe some rodents eat it and see if there's some kind of health effect, okay, some negative health effect. That's how the average person thinks a lot of these pesticides are tested for safety, but it's not the case at all, okay? Complete formulations are never tested for safety. In fact, when they are tested for safety, they actually come in, when complete formulations are tested for safety by independent labs, they actually come in exponentially more toxic most of the time. Here's the thing. Here's how it actually works. So let me see here. Okay, so here's how it actually works. Like in a complete formulation, as you can see here, so here's Roundup. And the thing with Roundup, there are hundreds of different Roundup products, and each product has a slightly different formulation. But the thing to take away from is each formulation has basically an active ingredient, which is like the main player, and a bunch of inert or inactive ingredients, or sometimes they mention other ingredients that are inactive players, and they're meant to basically make the active ingredient a lot stronger or more persistent in the environment, or be able to penetrate the root more of a particular plant, or whatever is needed in that environment, okay? So with Roundup Ready, the main active ingredient is glyphosate. And you can see in this case, it's like 48.7% of the entire formulation. And the other ingredients are 51.3%, okay? So glyphosate, as a good example here, is fairly, it's a terrible herbicide. It's fairly weak as an isolated active ingredient, which is how it's tested for safety by these safety standard companies that he's referring to. Not companies, but government organizations that he's referring to, which are honestly like 30 or 40 years old. There's a tremendous amount of advancements that have gone on, but the thing with government agencies is they're a lot of times very slow to change, you know? So a lot of the safety testing they're using right now to screen these pesticides have been created 30 or 40 years ago. And they only require the active ingredient to be tested in isolation on its own, all right? But remember, the role of the inactive ingredients is to make the active ingredient more toxic in one way or another. So obviously, when you take the inactive ingredients out and only test the active ingredient on its own in isolation, which is never how it's used out in the field, of course, it's not going to be as toxic most of the time, okay? Especially the case with glyphosate. Again, Roundup, it's a very popular product used worldwide, and glyphosate, I can tell you for sure, it's a very weak herbicide. It's very, very ineffective. But then when you throw all these inactive ingredients or other ingredients, which are always kept secret and never allowed into public domain, into the formulation, then the active ingredient becomes exponentially way more toxic, okay? And you can see here, it's not the whole formulation. You can see in other products here, like atrazine is very common. It's only 4% of the entire formulation, where you can see other ingredients, 95.9%. All right. And you can see with this product here, over here, it's 0.5% of the entire formulation. Other ingredients, 99.5% of the entire formulation. And again, all the safety testing requires is just the active ingredient to be tested in isolation on its own. And that's it. And that is never how it's used out in the field, ever, ever. You're using complete formulations out of the field. Like you're using this whole product. You're using this whole product. You're using this whole product. Like even when you go to Home Depot and buy this, you don't buy the isolated active ingredient. You buy the whole product and then you use the whole product because that's how it's used. But that's never how it's tested for safety, ever, ever. So by claiming they're perfectly safe and they're hundreds of times smaller than industry limits, et cetera, these are data-free assumptions. There is no data to prove this. And the only data that does exist are done by independent labs. Some of the researchers that I have interviewed and included in this presentation, and they most always, no absolutes, but most always show that the complete formulation is far more toxic than the active ingredient in isolation on its own. That's like common sense to me, you know, but I know a lot of people these days, they even need a study to show that it's okay for them to go to the bathroom once a day, you know? So here's the data, okay? So you guys are welcome to check this out in a lot more detail, but here's one study you can check out. You can see here. So most importantly, 8 formulations out of the 9 were up to 1,000 times more toxic than their active principle. Obviously, because that's what it's supposed to do. The active ingredient in pretty much all of these biocide formulations is fairly weak without the inactive ingredients present, which is why the inactive ingredients needed to be created to begin with, you know, but there is no safety testing that requires the complete formulation to be tested for safety on its own. And there's a myriad of reasons for this. One is that it benefits industry because the industry can change a lot of the formulations of the inactive ingredients to create new complete formulations, okay? So there are a myriad of advantages, but the point being is, getting back to this, our results challenge the relevance of acceptable daily limits for pesticides because this is the norm calculated from the toxicity of active principle alone. And this is how safety testings are done, but this isn't how products are used out in the field. So that's important, okay? And here are more studies you can check out that basically, for the most part, say the same exact things, okay? And these are just a minute amount I've been able to find basically on PubMed.gov, which again, you guys, with these data influencers, there's nothing magical about presenting this data. You have access to it too. Just go to PubMed.gov. Some studies you can read the abstract, but to get the full study, you might have to pay like a little bit, but who cares, you know? If you're really passionate about it, just pay a few bucks and get access to it. And if you have trouble reading what the studies mean, just reach out to like a PhD on Upwork.com or maybe in your network and have them help you. You know, there's nothing magical about this. You can become your own mechanic as well, but some resources for you to look into. Now, these studies are just a small, minute amount of studies available on this subject. They're like hundreds, okay, proving exactly what I'm saying now, which is the complete formulation is far more toxic than the active ingredient on its own. That's obvious. That's just common sense. That is why the inactive ingredients are put into the formulation to make the active ingredient more toxic. That's just common sense. But if you guys need studies to prove the obvious, like here you go, you know, just start with these. And at the bottom of these studies, they always reference other studies that are similar to these studies, and you can kind of just go down the rabbit hole there, okay? So there you go. Here's another one. Check them out yourself. I also did a podcast. You can check it out. It's on Eugene Trufkin Radio, episode 160 with Robin. He's one of the original researchers that actually took a complete formulation and tested it for safety, okay? So he started the ground level research on like, hey, you know, I see industries requiring only the active ingredient to be tested in isolation on its own, but we know that active ingredients in isolation aren't that strong. what would happen if we test the complete formulation? Sure enough, they showed that it's actually far more toxic, which is freaking obvious. But please check it out. These are the guys that are doing the ground level research. This research here, okay, not just reading the research, they're actually doing that research. That's critical, because a lot of these data influencers, they just read research. They don't do the research, and most often they just don't have the field experience that I've seen that's necessary in this type of field. They do the research and they're like, well, they take it at surface level and then kind of come to a data-free conclusion that it must be safe all around, without having that critical eye and critical thinking skills required to really come to a concrete conclusion. So please check it out here. The other thing to consider is studies are great. But real world is where things really happen. And in the real world, people are exposed to a myriad of chemicals. Here's a good report showing collectively laboratories identified up to 232 industrial compounds and pollutants in these babies, in basically babies born in metropolitan areas, okay? Finding complex mixtures of compounds in each infant. Okay, and that's just from birth. And these little children, they have smaller metabolism, so they're not able to metabolize a lot of these chemicals as effectively. So there's greater health consequences. And no safety studies are also done on, even when rodent studies are done on baby rodents, they're done on adults all the time. So there's that. So remember, they're saying it's safe, because an active ingredient in isolation on its own is tested in a laboratory setting. But the truth is, complete formulations are what's used in a field. And on top of that, a myriad of formulations are used in that field, okay? And on top of that, people are exposed to a myriad of different chemicals throughout their day. Like, for example, the average person wakes up, they put on a bunch of hygiene products or shampoo that has a myriad of chemicals. They get soaked up through your skin, into your bloodstream, into your visceral tissue. They pop a few of their high potency, pharmaceutical drugs, which kind of mess up your biochemistry as well. Remember, when you change, the human body is a system of systems. When you start interfering greatly with one system, it has a cascade effect on all 12 systems, okay? There is no isolated system that you could affect. Everything is interconnected. Like, your brain can't exist without its liver or its heart, or its lungs, et cetera, okay? And then they have their, coffee, which is laced with like a myriad of coffee beans are grown with a myriad of biocides. Then they're served in plastic, so you get those microplastics, those xenoestrogens. Then the myriad of additives or whatever is in the Frappuccino, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the load is already huge just from getting up in the morning. And then they go to the office, and actually there's like a tremendous amount of toxicity in office environments too, especially if windows or good ventilation practices aren't implemented. Because a lot of the chemicals used to clean the carpets, the desks, et cetera, they kind of accumulate. In those office cubicles. Because unlike outside, there's a lot of ventilation and movement, but there's not much movement inside of these offices, okay? So you're breathing that all day, then you're wearing this synthetic clothing, then you go to lunch with your friends. A lot of this is industrially raised food, so there's a gargantuous amount of biocides here, probably trace amounts. If you tested this, you'll probably find trace amounts of various, like 5 or 6 biocides on each one of these food products. And you're eating all of them and this wine, okay? And then the bigger picture, you got environmental toxicity, EMF radiation, on and on. So people aren't exposed just to an active ingredient in isolation on its own. This is critical to understand. That just never happens. They're exposed to complete formulations of a myriad of different compounds here, daily, every single day. And again, with this article here, 223 different industrial compounds and pollutants in newborn babies born in metropolitan areas, right? So that's huge. And that's probably just what they tested for. If they just keep testing and testing and testing, because there are probably 40, 50,000 just agricultural chemicals on the market today. If they just keep testing and testing and testing, they'll find more and more. I guarantee you, this is just what they tested for. If they tested for thousands more, they'll probably like thousands of these pollutants. All right. So that's important to understand. And you're welcome to kind of check out these studies here if you're more data driven and need a little bit of reassurance from that. Data is great, but it only provides information from one vantage point, okay? And you can't draw concrete conclusions from one data. You can't even draw concrete conclusions from a meta-analysis, because even in a meta-analysis, there are no absolutes. There's variability from study to study used in the meta-analysis. And then even if you put each individual study in the microscope, you'll see there's variability from subject to subject as well. So yes, research is great, but you cannot only rely on research. You have to have a broader, more critical perspective. Here's some more studies and some more studies for you to look at that reinforce the fact that people are bombarded with complete formulations of chemicals 24/7. And who knows what this cocktail of chemicals are doing. But the point being is they're definitely not just exposed to an active ingredient in isolation on its own. This here, it's a little bit of a sidetrack article, but it shows how persistent a lot of these chemicals are. So CDC finds toxic weed killer in 87% of children tested. And most likely, a lot of times this does come from food, or it comes from, they might spray this on the playground, and a lot of kids just play around with this. It also affects pets as well. I highlighted this. So in March 2025, International Agency of Research, subdivision of WHO, World Health Organization, determined that glyphosate was a probable carcinogen, group 2A. So when it kind of gets to this level, that means it definitely is. Just give it a few more years and they'll conclude it most definitely is causing cancer, okay? So this is important. Another key feature to consider is chemical synergy. Again, studies are great, you know, they're a good addition, but they don't give you a broad, accurate picture oftentimes. You got to go out there in the field and see how it's actually done in the real world. That's where the effects actually are present. And in farming practices, what happens is during each farming cycle, a farmer will use a couple of different complete formulations of biocides to spray on that field, depending on the environment and what they need. They're not using just one complete formulation. They're using multiple all at the same time. And a lot of times they would actually just put all of them all in the same bucket and mix it and spray it as one unit. And a lot of times too, when you're using, you have to remember, there's no free lunch. And when you start using a lot of these chemicals, the bugs try to survive as well, just like you, right? Or the weeds as well. And they become resistant to the chemicals over time. So eventually the complete formulations then need to be reformulated and multiple active ingredients need to be added to the complete formulations. Now you have complete formulations, each with multiple active ingredients and unknown inactive ingredients all being sprayed on this crop. I don't see any isolated active ingredient being sprayed here. I don't see glyphosate being sprayed here. Glyphosate is not. These are complete formulations of glyphosate plus a myriad of inert ingredients that are being sprayed. Plus this guy might have something else. This guy might, or these three guys might have a mixture that was mixed with 5 different biocides that are all being sprayed on here all at the same time. Guys, let's use a little bit of common sense too. Imagine if I had an apple and I sprayed water and vinegar on one apple, which is an organic biocide, and I sprayed glyphosate on another apple, which is a synthetic herbicide, biocide as well. Which one would you eat? Obviously, you would eat the one with the water and the vinegar or salt or whatever, man. Come on, you guys. We're kind of losing a little bit of common sense here in this in this crazy world that has normalized mental and physical pathology to the nth degree. It's like ridiculous, man. It's almost impossible to even find a healthy health professional now. Most of them are just as sick and lost and medically drugged out as the people they're trying to freaking help. It's ridiculous, and overworked as the people they're trying to help, okay? So this is how it's used in the field. This is what happens in the field, not testing an isolated active ingredient on its own, okay? So important. And here's some studies, okay, that you can check out. Here's a good study that I liked, a quick excerpt here. Perhaps that I kind of highlighted, perhaps the most striking finding of our study is the demonstration that large numbers of weak xenoestrogens are able to modulate significantly the effects of potent steroid estrogen 17B estradiol. This modulation occurred even when each individual xenoestrogen was present at levels that did not induce measurable effects, well below the individual NOECs and ECs. EC values. Okay, there you go. Okay, and here's this. Here's another study that you can check out. And again, guys, go to PubMed and you'll find hundreds of these studies. I'm just kind of highlighting just a few sprinkle here so to get your journey started. But it's so obvious, you know? It's so obvious. And this is like common sense. This doesn't even need to be spoken about. And this is why it's like 2025. I'm like, dude, I should not have to be given these kind of presentations. It is my passion project, but this should just be common knowledge now, especially among health professionals. Come on, you guys, we could do better. Okay. So another thing, a lot of these data influencers constantly use, and they always use this phrase, the dose makes the poison. But my question is, does it? And with anything mental and physical health related, there are no absolutes. So in some cases, it may. In some cases, it may not. But just generally stating that as the only rule is ridiculous and very amateur. Okay, so let's see what's going on.
I would never touch an inorganic fruit because fruits absorb pesticides and herbicides and insecticides through their skin. There was a recent study published about inorganic strawberries where they actually took inorganic strawberries from the supermarket, brought them home, put them in a commercial press, pressed the juice out of them, and there was so much pesticide in the juice they were able to take that juice and respray the crop.
Whoa, that's nasty.
And still have the same level of pesticide protection from the juice that was squeezed from inorganic.
So I asked Gary to cite his source to verify whether what he said was true. Time school. And lo and behold, he cites this blog, which doesn't even use the correct acronym for the Environmental Working Group. What on earth is the EMG? And the entire blog only cites one study on Chinese farmers applying pesticides to their crops. I'm sorry, what have Chinese farmers spraying crops got anything to do with you in the US consuming fruits? And this make-believe study about strawberries containing so much pesticide.
So, again, U.S. does import a lot of food products to the U.S.
Make-believe study about strawberries containing so much pesticide that you can juice them.
U.S. does import a lot of food products from China to the U.S. Apologies.
And respray the crop is simply ridiculous. This is who you're taking health advice from, really. Biohacker in the bio. And just to make it clear, organic fruits are not pesticide-free. They simply use pesticides from natural sources, which tells us precisely nothing about whether they're less toxic. In reality, these natural pesticides have far less data on their safety. But let's be real here, the pesticide data program actually shows that over 99% of the samples tested had pesticide residues below the EPA's allowable level. And the allowable level is safe by a factor of 100, meaning it's 100 times smaller than the amount required for a negative health effect. Just eat your fruit and veg.
Okay, so basically what happens in terms of safety testing is they kind of set a allowable limit. But again, complete formulations are never tested for safety, so how could they determine an allowable limit? They set that allowable limit based off the active ingredient in isolation on its own. And like, for example, with our case with glyphosate, it's an extremely weak, which is an active ingredient in Roundup. It's an extremely weak herbicide. It's so weak and flimsy. It does almost nothing without the inactive ingredients. It's kind of like a bullet without a gun. Okay, like it's not going to do anything, even if you throw it really hard at a person. But when you load it in a gun and use all those other parts of the gun, then all of a sudden it becomes extremely dangerous, okay? And then what they say is basically, oh, you know, we tested the active ingredient in isolation on its own. We set this limit, and if we just do it 100 times smaller than that, then everything would be fine. And this is just a presumption. It is a data-free presumption because there's no data to prove that to be the case. And it's basically kind of a model derived from, this guy's legit, he's a legend, Paracelsus. Not his real name, but we'll just use this name here because that's what he's commonly referred to. And he became, after his death, a very popular like physician, alchemist, and philosopher from the Renaissance era. And he's a really interesting guy if you guys want to research him a bit more. But he spent a large portion of his career just traveling around Europe and I believe some parts of Northern Africa as well, just learning from all sorts of different people about health and wellness. And the thing that irritated him the most, ironically, is the standards of the medical field at the time and how much the practitioners were basically just parrots. They're memorizing text and zero critical thinking skills. And he emphasized actually going out in the field and getting the experience there and seeing how it actually works in the real world. And he was ridiculed for this, for forever, but it ended up being true. And he even ended up introducing chemistry to the medical field as well, including developing the modern day model of toxicology, which is used today. And the cool part is he even served as a physician in the army during the Netherlands Wars, I believe, against Russia. He was captured by the Russians as well and managed to escape, and eventually ended up in Salzburg as a physician, which is a town I got to visit a while back. Extremely beautiful. I would recommend anyone visit it. It's in Austria. But he ended up creating the model of toxicology, okay? And which was developed in the 1600s. And I get it, but things have advanced a tremendous amount since then, okay? And there have been a lot of changes, and this model is still kind of parroted by a lot of these, data influencers. And again, it's total data-free assumptions, because check this out. Dose makes the poison equals, what does it equal? It's a monotonic dose response. So that is, in that case, as you increase the quantity of that particular substance, it becomes more toxic. And that's true for substances that serve as a monotonic dose response. But hold on, if we critically look into it, but are all products that way? No, there are actually over 600 plus chemicals on the market today that I could find that have a non-monotonic dose response, meaning at parts per million, it's not toxic. At parts per billion, still not toxic. But wait, at parts per trillion, which is one drop in like an Olympic-sized swimming pool, basically, it all of a sudden becomes toxic and starts affecting your body in some negative way, okay? And there are 600 plus chemicals on the market today that I know of, but there are probably even way more than this, and probably way more that we haven't even researched yet, right? But people are exposed to every single day. So it's not accurate to say that every single product has a monotonic dose response, because it's not true. And either they don't know this or purposely omitting it, I don't know. But no absolutes. That's why it's important to be a critical thinker and look things over thoroughly before deciding on a conclusion. Or just say, based off this, we can conclude this way, but not as an absolute. Here are some interesting studies that you could look for as well. This is a great report. Another great study, another great study, another great study, another one again. Just so you guys can start a journey on where to start looking. Again, these are just some minor studies I've been able to find that do prove my point. But there are hundreds of them that prove this, okay? Again, this is just common knowledge for researchers in this area that has already been known for like 20 or 30 years, that have actually done the research, or farmers out in the field. This is like nothing new. It's like me trying to talk you into like the sky is blue, okay? But this is what happens when you get data influencers without any actual industry experience, looking at paper instead of real world, and then coming to conclusions off that. I'm arguing that they're data-free assumptions. They don't have any data to support their conclusions. Another thing to consider, you guys, is just like in every field, there's a lot of industry corruption too, in agriculture and in the chemical industry. Wherever there's a lot of money, you're going to find a lot of corruption most of the time. This is just one popular example. You guys can look him up, Michael Taylor. You can see here, staff attorney at the FDA. Then he works for Monsanto, which is a chemical company, well-known chemical company that is now owned by Bayer. Then he goes back to the FDA, to the USDA, blah, 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 and then he becomes the FDA commissioner. Okay, so there's a lot of conflict of interest here, okay, in the sense that, the FDA is supposed to protect you from these companies, but these companies are sending people to run for office in the FDA and then change rules around for the companies most often, okay? And this happens all the time. And you guys have to remember that people that currently work for the FDA, their intention is most often to go work for a private company after they're done with their government work. because they're getting paid gargantuous amounts more. So the last thing they want to do is rock the boat and cause too many problems and burn too many bridges with these companies, right? So at this point, I mean, you guys, if you don't see the conflict of interest there, I don't know what else to explain to you. I mean, it's as obvious as day. A blind man can see what's going on, as my friend Brian Carroll would say. Okay. So up to you to decide. If you want to stay asleep and you want to stay blind and then wondering why you always have chronic health issues, keep doing that if it's working for you, okay? Don't listen to what I have to say then. So some other things to consider too. A lot of these, pretty much all of these safety studies are done in-house by the chemical companies, by scientists that are on their payroll. And then these studies are sent in to the FDA for approval, all right? That's basically, as Andre Lou would say, the equivalent of having you grade your own test for yourself, your teacher letting you grade your own test for yourself, okay? And I don't know if I need to explain that any further, the obvious conflict of interest there, okay? So I'm just gonna end it there, and hopefully like the people watching this have like a reasonable IQ to be able to connect the dots together. So again, like I mentioned, higher ups in the FDA don't rock the boat, because once they retire from government, they go into industry and make way more. 10X is just an example here. Safety, again, also what's important to remember is these safety studies done by these chemical companies, by their scientists in-house, are never released to the public. If their science is so strong and so good, why do they have to keep it a secret? Okay? That is the opposite of what science is. Science is transparent. That way you can get peer reviewed, and if it's legit, it's legit. If it's not, it's not. So there's obvious huge problems with that. All right. And the only times when they are released are due to lawsuits, or some kind of disgruntled employee leaks the files of some sort. And whenever they're released, you can see the studies are shit. They're flimsy. And these are a lot of the same studies, industry studies, that a lot of these data researchers are citing. Another big thing is these testing methods are 30 or 40 years old, okay? Things have advanced so much since then, but government agencies are still using these older methods because they're just, you can look at them as huge corporations, and the bigger the company is, the harder it is to shift procedures, okay? Because you need to retrain so many people, change procedures, change laws, et cetera, et cetera. It's not easy. And let's look at how about we're talking about corruption. Let's look at how about our social media influencers, you know? So here we had one example. I actually got this this is kind of covered here. The source was from Anthony Caffey, MD, that Dr. Eads is sponsored, or at least by the time I read this, American Food and Beverage Association. So I just, like, for me personally, I'm a huge advocate of health and wellness and living life sustainably and promoting root cause healthcare and biodynamic farming in the US. And I would never take money from these people. This is what's leading to obesity, misery, and disease. One of the variables that's leading to obesity, misery, and disease in the US. Of course, it's inevitably a core values and a belief system in the country too, which I touched on many times before on other podcasts. But these are the products that are leading to obesity. So it makes no sense being a health advocate and then taking money from companies that are destroying America's health, okay? Let's see. So let's
hide the fact that I work with the
This is from
APA to
Anthony.
educate people on the safety of aspartame.
If you don't like the fact that people say that you're taking money from the food and beverage companies, then don't take money from the food and beverage companies. It's that simple. At least now that you've openly admitted on the record that you're paid shill for the food and beverage companies, hopefully in the future, you're not going to be able to get away with lying about it like you did here. Class dismissed, IDS.
So, let's see. So here, let me try to move this here. So here's a warning that this influencer got from the Federal Trade Commission, okay? It's been a little while since I read it here. So you posted a second video on Instagram, July 2023, in which you stated that Joint Experts Committee on Food Additives just confirmed right now that aspartame does not cause cancer in humans and that it is safe and that aspartame is safe. The posts are available on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. It appears that you were paid by the American Beverage Association, ABA, to make these posts, okay? So I don't know the extent. This I got from Anthony Caffey as well. I don't know the extent of what kind of money he has or what kind of agreement, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, in my opinion, this is a conflict of interest, okay? Health professionals should not be taking money from companies of this sort. That's just my opinion, though. And it happens often. So you can see here by this piece by the Washington Post, the food industry pays influencer dietitians to shape your eating habits, obviously, okay? It happens so often, you guys. And you just have to question the ethics. I know, obviously money in monetary society is important, but at the end of the day, ethics are important too, And you got into the health field to make people healthy, and it's just like totally doesn't make any sense to take food from junk food or take money from junk food companies and promote their nonsense and using your title of like a dietitian or medical doctor to make that somehow acceptable. Okay, that's just, I think, totally wrong in my opinion, totally unethical, and should honestly be illegal. Should be illegal. And you can see it's been happening for forever. Remember when doctors were promoting smoking or the image of a doctor? Always a stethoscope, It's so funny. It's like, this is what's used to symbolize authority. Like, okay, you're going to take my heart rate any second. Awesome, great. So one strategic response of tobacco companies was to devise advertising referred directly to physicians. As an ad campaign featuring physicians developed through the early 1950s, tobacco executives used the doctor image to assure the customer that their respective brands were safe. Interesting. Doesn't that kind of look like what's happening, with a lot of these influencers saying like, oh, even to smaller degrees, eating processed food is good, these additives, aspartame, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that kind of looks similar, okay? And you don't have to keep making the same mistakes, obviously. So let's look here.
My next guest used to work for the Coca-Cola company, and he says he saw firsthand how the food and pharma industries rigged the system to their advantage. Kaylee Means is now the founder of TrueMed and joins me now. But before we get started, we just reached out to Coca-Cola a little while ago for comment, and we haven't heard back. So what do you have to tell us about what's going on inside Coca-Cola?
Well, first, Jesse, God bless you for paying attention and drawing attention to the most important issue in the world, which is that we're getting sicker, fatter, more depressed, more infertile because of food. 8 of the 10 leading causes of Americans today are directly tied to food, reversible by food. But we really are gaslighted from that fact, and it's because of a rigged system. And 3 particular levels I saw is that food companies directly pay medical groups. Coke has funneled millions of dollars, and the American Academy of Diabetes, the American Academy of Pediatrics, as you said, the American Nutrition Association, they've accepted millions of dollars from Coke. And what does that buy? When we have diabetes water, sugar consumption going up among children 100x in 100 years, we have silence from the American Diabetes Association on sugary drinks when 25% of teenagers now are pre-diabetic. They're also, as you've very aptly pointed out, research institutions. And what does that get? What is that 11 times more from food than the NIH? What does that get? It gets the doctors on the USDA nutrition guidelines. Right now, shamefully, and I believe this is the most shameful, violent policy in America, the USDA, our own government, says that a 2-year-old, it's okay for them to have 10% of their diet as added sugar. It's a systematic rigging of the institutions of trust. I mean, this is not complicated. And earlier in my career, I saw this. Unimpressive PR executives sit around conference rooms and ask, how do we rig? How do we gaslight people, in an Orwellian way from not believing what's right in front of us? 80% of American adults are overweight or obese. 50% of adults have prediabetes or diabetes. We are being brought to our knees by preventable metabolic dysfunction. I think the real issue here, Jesse, as you alluded to, is pharma is standing silent, and the medical institutions are standing silent because they profit from people being sick, and they're getting sick because of food.
Okay. So, guys, obviously, what he's saying is just common sense, which is crazy that you need even any studies or anything to let me actually see here. Sorry, guys. Not used to using PowerPoint for a long time here. So you guys, it's obvious, America's a disaster. They're literally the sickest humans in the history of the human race. The most medically drugged out humans in the history of the human race too, but yet still the sickest, okay? With 9 out of 10 Americans being metabolically sick right now, okay? So he's right. And a lot of it is due to poor food and lifestyle choices. That's it. It's that simple, okay? So it's not rocket science. And understand that there's a lot of industry influence, okay? And it is negatively affecting you. Another key thing, like I wrote here, not all researchers and experts are as smart or honest as you think. Obviously, hopefully it's clear at this point. But let's take a look at what's going on here. Remember, this was legal and encouraged by the quote unquote experts for a very long time. Let's see.
With the possibility of a serious infantile paralysis epidemic, health authorities of the city of San Antonio, Texas, attacked the germ carriers throughout the city. With the war-discovered DDT in special sprayers, sections of the city are blanketed with the insecticide in the fight to stop the spread of the dread poliomyelitis. Every suspected spot is sprayed.
The medical officer explains that buildings treated with DDT remain effective against mosquitoes for about 3 months. The Africans at first are not very impressed. Some are afraid that the DDT will poison them, while others suspect some sort of witchcraft. The entomologist calls for a bowl of porridge. This is sprayed with the solution in full view of the audience. He now eats several spoonfuls of the mixture to show that the contaminated food is harmless. Even this fails to convince the audience. Arab Kipkoy is the chief spokesman and states his objections with eloquence. He says that the new medicine is a bad poison that may exterminate the whole tribe.
All right, guys. So remember, that was encouraged by the experts, and all those like tribes people were probably looked at like retards for not accepting these chemicals. But it's a common thing. What happens is chemicals get approved, they're like perfectly safe, et cetera, et cetera. 20 years go by, the health effects start seeping in, and they're like, well, actually not the case. Okay, let's take it off and let's put another formulation in. Same thing, kind of test it for safety. Only the active ingredient in isolation, never the complete formulation. They're like 20 years goes by. Oh, actually, it's not safe after all. Let's take it out. My prediction is honestly, eventually they're going to find out all of these chemicals cause cancer, okay? Or some kind of chronic health issue, some kind of disturbance to the gut microbiome or cardiovascular system or any system of the human body, okay? Eventually, because this is just keeps happening again and again and again and again and again and again. It's like the same story on replay and people just fall for it over and over again. Like here, same with Roundup, perfectly safe, doesn't persist in the environment. Now it's like, a type 2 carcinogen, eventually probably going to be taken out of the market very soon. Here you can see as of March, Monsanto has reached settlements and agreements in nearly 100,000 Roundup lawsuits. Monsanto paid approximately $11 billion at the time of that article. But there's still so many lawsuits going on, and they wouldn't be losing these lawsuits if the formulation was safe. It's like, come on, guys. It's A and B, okay? Here's another kind of blockbuster story. Jurors give $289 million to a man they say got cancer from Monsanto's Roundup weed killer. It's a very famous story. Another story you can check out. There's like so many of these guys. Again, this is all just common knowledge for people in the industry. It's like I'm not presenting anything new here at all, which is I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, dude, it's 2025. Like, why do we still have a debate about this? Come on. Here's another one, plastic's perfectly safe. Oh, now microplastics found to clog arteries and cause other health issues, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'm using this as a side example that it doesn't just happen in agriculture, but it's all chemicals. Or asbestos, the stuff that they used to put in housing. Completely safe. It's not even toxic under it's not even listed under the LD50. And now look what these guys have to wear to remove it. And people lived in that 24/7. That's a perfect example, a good example, okay? This is a great piece you can read, okay? How basically using history to your advantage, taking from these lessons, seeing a pattern. You see the chemical is released into the market, claimed to be safe. Many years go by, turns out not to be safe, taken out from the market, new chemical comes in. Same story, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Come on, guys, it's time to catch on. Also, regulators make mistakes all the time. There are 4,500 drugs that were once approved and completely safe that are taken out of the market for one reason or another every single year, right here. So on average, about 4,500 drugs and devices are pulled from the US shelves each year, just from the US. And these were all initially approved to be completely safe. Remember, also any pharmaceutical drug that ended up killing someone or causing someone severe adverse health effects was at one point scientifically proven to be completely safe. Okay. Here's a good one. In 2006 alone, France banned 126 formulations of glyphosate, which is another thing with these data influencers. They're like, oh, glyphosate is safe. I'm like, well, there are hundreds of Roundup formulations. Which one are you referring to? I even messaged a couple of them. They don't know. They don't know. They even think glyphosate is the complete formulation. They think what this guy is spraying is glyphosate. That may be one of the ingredients in what he's spraying among a myriad, but they think that is the complete formulation. Interesting study you can read up. Another interesting study you can read into. Supports what I'm saying here. Some interesting articles, you know. A Harvard professor who studies dishonesty is accused of falsifying data. I didn't follow up with this story. It's a funny story. Just check it out. It's on YouTube, I'm sure. Here's some interesting, peer-reviewed is the gold standard supposedly, but here's some interesting articles to even shine some light on the shortcomings of that system. And you guys, I know if like a person's wearing a English is a second language here, stethoscope. I know if a person is wearing kind of like a stethoscope or whatever, you know, it instantly screams credibility to the sheep. But hey, you know, a lot of people just suck at their job. Most doctors suck. There are a few that are amazing, but most people in every field just suck at what they do. They got into it for the wrong reasons. Monetary reasons, that's the worst reason to get into the health field for, although a lot of people especially get into the medical field for that. Prestige, whatever. Okay. In a sense, it results in a incompetent practitioner. And although they wear shrubs and a white coat and whatever, they have an MD on that, it doesn't mean they're extremely competent, or if they're a dietitian or whatever. So you got to dig deeper. Check out this book. In the book How Not to Die by Michael Gerber, in the book How Not to Die by Michael Gerber, MD, shows us that about 337,000 people die from medical error every single year. Okay, this includes almost 200,000 deaths from medical drug side effects, 99,000 deaths from hospital-acquired infections, 20,000 deaths from hospital errors, 12,000 deaths from unnecessary surgery complications, and 7,000 deaths from wrong medications. So here, the number is slightly different. It just depends on which source, exactly how they're calculating this, but it's undeniable from various sources that medical error is the third leading cause of death in the US, okay? Just behind cancer and heart disease, all right? So people make mistakes all the time. They're rushed. They're people just like you. Just to give you an idea, you get 337,000 people die from medical error every year. Medical error every year. In 10 years in the Vietnam War, you had 58,000 soldiers die. In 10 years, it's 5,800 a year. Here you have 337,000 every year. I think the book actually quoted nearly 400,000. I use this number for a certain reason. Let's look at Afghanistan, 20 years, 1,900 deaths in 20 years. Meanwhile, here you have 337,000 deaths. Let's look at the big players. World War II, 4 years long, 240,000 deaths. Now that's a serious conflict, but that's over 4 years. Every single year, 337,000 deaths. All right. So again, guys, with research, it's just one tool to look at. You can't come to a definite conclusion just by looking even at a meta-analysis. You have to go out there in the field and you have to be a critical thinker and see what's really working in the real world. This is so important. And these guys quote Paracelsus's model of toxicology so much. That is his whole entire philosophy for healthcare, to go out there and observe and do the work out in the field. That's what he had huge pushback from the medical industry back in the day. So again, no absolutes in research. It's just from one vantage point, it gives you certain answers. You have to investigate further. You can find a study, again, to prove any point of view if you look hard enough. Also, there's a lot of money and influence in research. Thus, the research can be biased and corrupt, and it oftentimes is. To be a bit more on the critical thinking side, here are some great books you guys can start with, okay? These are books I used. I'm sure there are many other books out there that are great. These two, I would start, these two are probably my favorite. These two are good programs. Honestly, all these books are great. I love this book the best, okay? It's small, it's to the point. It basically gives you a good overview of, when two people come together, a third consciousness is formed that would not exist without those two people coming together, okay? Same thing happens with crowd psychology. When a crowd gets together, a third and a new type of consciousness is formed that would not exist without that crowd, and it behaves and functions differently from each individual. And it gives a good representation of how easily people in crowds are influenced and how emotional they are, right? This book is great because it shows, it actually touches on it in this book as well, but it shows how people use symbols of authority like a cross or a stethoscope, to show that they're smart, or a diploma or a degree or whatever, to influence the sheep into believing anything they say without critically thinking, because it gives them kind of like easy answers, but you better hope that what they're saying is right then, okay? So here are some books you can start with. Here are some more amazing works of art, in my opinion, that you can look into as well. This one's great, okay? Again, especially these two authors, ridiculed at the time. Oh, you're an idiot. You don't follow the science. You're not a team player. You're not an expert. Well, they turned out to be right, about a lot. So a lot of times the experts are wrong too. So hopefully you can kind of see. You can check out my episode with Dave Murphy as well on his investigation into glyphosate. Very informative. And unlike my interview with Robin, which is a researcher in the field, Dave is kind of a journalist. He's a researcher and investigator as well, but he gives you more insight of the politics behind that industry, okay? And the swamp of that industry in general and the corruption. So that way you don't take things at surface value. You can kind of ask more deeper questions. Let me move this here. This is an amazing interview. This guy is a very well-known researcher from UC Berkeley. So fellow UC, friend here. I graduated from the University of California, Irvine, but he did research on atrazine and how they affected frogs, okay? And he was initially funded by the company that made atrazine, but then once his research showed that the chemical was actually dangerous, the company tried to shut him down, blackmail him, harass him a tremendous amount. I think, if I'm not mistaken, like they even tried to maybe even threaten his kids at one point. And he talks about it in this interview. So please, guys, check it out. That way, you know what's going in your food and you don't take it at surface value that like all this is thoroughly tested for safety and it's all honest and blah, blah, blah. Not the case, okay? So again, quick reminder, all the experts said this was totally fine. spraying it on kids in a pool, on kids in a park, kids at school, on the park, in the streets, etc., etc. Where is it now? Banned. Again, same cycle. Chemical approved, quote unquote safe, not really thoroughly done as a complete formulation though. Stays in the market, side effects roll around, taken out, new one comes in. Does the same exact thing. Stays in the market for 10 years, whatever, side effects start coming in, take it out, new one, etc., etc. Okay, same story, guys. You can't keep falling for these same scenarios. So let's look at this one here. Another one they claim like organic uses pesticides too. So let's see.
Gary Brecker chatting absolute waffle again. Time school.
Here's something really interesting. I know that people talk about the expense of eating organic, but this is the exact same brand. This is non-organic. This is organic. This is only $1 more. But think about this. More nutrient-dense foods require less satiation. So you actually eat less of this to get satiated, because and organic matters because it's not sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, or preservatives.
His first incorrect statement, organic produce is more nutrient dense. Not really. This review of several meta-analyses, including over 300 studies, did show that organic crops had 17% higher levels of antioxidant activity. Furthermore, organic produce did have higher levels of xanthophylls and L-ascorbic acid, but they found 15% lower levels of vitamin E. And they did not find any differences for a whole range of carotenoids, vitamins, flavonols, and so on. And get this, they found that organic foods had lower concentrations of proteins, amino acids, and fiber. The point is that although organic foods may be higher or lower in some nutrients, it really does not matter if you're consuming enough fruits and vegetables to begin with. Gary also claimed that organic crops don't use pesticides. That's completely false. Organic crops do use pesticides, the only difference is that they're derived from natural substances, not synthetic ones. Here's a list of organic pesticides approved by the USDA. Oh, look at that, hydrogen peroxide. Coniothyria militant. Oh, the horror! If you want to buy organic food to appear cool, that's perfectly fine. But don't go around preaching they're so much healthier or pesticide free, because they're not. Class dismissed.
All right, guys. I think, again, organic program uses pesticides or biocides, right? Okay. First and foremost, if it's done properly, you would never actually get to using a biocide, okay? If proper soil health is taken into consideration. Take this. Okay, so pests are nature's way of getting rid of weak plants, okay? No weak plants, pests don't come around. And plants are strong when you take care of the soil health, okay? Because they get all their nutrients from the soil. So plants have roots, and basically they use those roots to, they distribute sugar through the roots in a thing called the rhizosphere. And they distribute a certain ratio of like fungi to bacteria. Each plant's ratio varies. And when this ratio is optimal, which naturally happens in an organic growing season, it helps the soil food web composition basically fuel the nutrition of that plant to make that plant healthy and strong. And if the plant is healthy and strong, it's not going to have pests coming around. Pests are, again, nature's way of getting rid of weak plants, all right? So keep that in mind. So if they're real organic growing principles, you're really not going to use any biocides unless it's a last resort. So again, pesticides are a final option. But what are those pesticides? Vinegar and water, salt and water, soap and water, copper. These are all organic pesticides. Would you rather have this stuff sprayed on your food or Roundup Ready, which is, owned by Bayer now and losing hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in lawsuits, okay, to people that are having negative health consequences from using these products? Again, let's use common sense, guys. What would you have? Apple here, I spray vinegar and water on this apple, and I have an apple here and I spray glyphosate on this apple. Which apple do you want to eat? End of conversation, okay? Not even close to dangerous, or not even close to the dangers of atrazine and Roundup. A little bit of space there. So guys, organic also means no antibiotics, GMOs, beta agonists, steroids, synthetic hormones, more ethical animal welfare practices, better working conditions and environments, etc., and a myriad of other things. It doesn't just cover not allowing to use synthetic biocides, so that's important to consider too. So again, with organic farming, again, it's a last resort. There are things you can do to help strengthen the plants and avoid pests. Mulching, so dangerous, right? Companion planting. This is one of my favorite styles. I have a home garden as well. You kind of plant certain plants that deter other pests from other plants. And you can kind of plant them together in combos, and each plant fights off different pests and also strengthens the soil food web in that particular environment. Again, what would you have, this or Roundup? You know what I mean? Come on, you guys. And again, the bigger thing is healthy soils. If it's really organic and biodynamic farming, you're going to have a great soil food web, okay, which is going to give that root system all the nutrients it needs to grow strong plants. And then you're going to get all those nutrients as well and be strong yourself as well. All right. When you start spraying various biocides on this soil food web, it disrupts everything, and not to the plant's advantage. It most always causes a decrease in, remember I mentioned that there's a certain ratio of fungi to bacteria in every plant. It causes a decrease in arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and most always just causes an overgrowth of bacteria. And what happens then, it disrupts the soil food web, making the plants weak. Okay. The next season comes around, more pests come around because now the plants are weaker. And you have to spray more if you're not going to change your farming practices. Okay. And then they get even weaker because it disrupts the soil food web even more. The next season comes around, you're going to have to spray even more. And eventually everything is dead here. You don't have soil anymore. You just have dirt, right? And you're not able to use that land anymore. And if you look at like an apple, and you shave off 70% of this, I got this from a book. It's not my idea. I just forgot exactly the author's name. And you shave off 70% of it, that's the ocean. There's nothing you can farm there, okay? So you're basically left with 30% of the surface volume, and you lose half of that because it's unfarmable land for one reason or another. So you're left really with like about 15%. And then you lose half of that because most metropolitan areas are built on the most fertile lands. So now you're left with about, like 7.5 to 8% of the land that's able to be farmed for food, right? And when you do monocropping, which is industrial agriculture, which requires all these synthetic biocides, which, are indirectly being promoted, you get the deterioration of the soil. So even less farmland is available for growing food even at that point, okay? This is such a long topic, guys. I'm kind of just touching the surface here, but I hope it's becoming obvious and I don't need to explain it to you further. So again, healthy soils equal no pests, all right? Especially the medical industry, they're stuck in this, like, you need chemicals for freaking everything, man. Like, chemical agriculture really took hold in like the 1950s. How did humans survive for 200,000 years before then? And even were thriving more and not as sick as right now. Come on. Not everything has to revolve around freaking chemicals. Here, okay, in an 8x8 space, okay, just by using that and growing mushrooms in buckets indoors all year round, and then also just wild foraging mulberries in my area, which are plentiful there, I'm able to have about 600 to 700 pounds of produce freshly picked that day, beyond organic, every single year, without using any pesticides, okay? At all. I don't know, this is like common sense, guys, come on. And when they're making fun of organic, I don't know what organic they're talking about. And I don't know that they know that there are various levels of organic, okay? Like this right here could be certified organic. This right here could be certified organic too. Making these broad brush strokes is just not an accurate way of describing things, okay? So this is Happy Dash Hens. This is where I volunteered on to learn about rotational grazing with poultry, all right? This is probably a cage-free operation, but could also be certified organic too, So what are they referring to? because the nutritional composition here is going to be different here than here. So here, the chickens go to the food. Here, they can't go anywhere, so the farmer has to bring food to the hens, right? And obviously, what they're going to bring them is a bunch of grains, corn and soy, all right? Grown with a myriad of synthetic biocides that then bioaccumulate in the tissue of these animals and in their eggs as well, and then make it into you too. Again, here's a good example. This could be certified organic. But this is also could be certified organic. Like, what are they talking about? What kind of organic are they talking about? Industrial organic or real organic? I don't know. I don't know if they know, honestly. This could be certified organic as well. And here, okay, 5-bar beef, where I volunteered at, could be certified organic too. Like, these are completely different operations, clearly. Like, what specifically are they talking about, though? But you guys, sorry, I had to close the window there. The sun was kind of blasting me a little bit too hard. But just to show you, so here, clipped, dehorned, on a bunch of beta agonists, probably steroids, fed a whole bunch of GMO corn and soy. Here, out in pasture 24/7. No dehorning, you can see. Bulls are not clipped at all. All they do is eat forage. That's their natural species-specific diet. So obviously the nutritional profile is going to be much better here. And on top of that, it's much cleaner meat. Dude, the toxicity here is going to be through the roof, okay? Let's see here. Okay. So you guys, I've been doing this, again, indirectly or directly, like my whole entire life, okay? So right now, I'm 40 years old, on no medical drugs, no steroids, no hormones, no supplements, all right? I got a body fat that's roughly around 10% all year round, okay? Blood pressure, perfect metabolic health here. So blood pressure is in the perfect range, average blood glucose is in the perfect range, triglycerides, HDL, total test. Because the thing is, it's like, are you actually doing these things that you're preaching as a health professional? Do you even know how to do it? Like, do you even know how to apply it to yourself? Do you know how to live a sustainable lifestyle yourself? Or are you working 40, 50, 60, 70-hour weeks and then telling your clients not to do it, not to work those hours, but yet you haven't figured out how to not to work those hours yourself, although you know it's not good for your health, among a myriad of other things, okay? So if you're concerned about metabolic health, I've eaten pretty much whole food, not pretty much, whole food my whole entire life. Okay, and this is the result. The numbers look fine when you just eat real food that the human digestive system has evolved to eat. Remember, the human species, there are 28 human species that have come and gone over the millions of years. So it's taken like very complicated evolution for your digestive system to form the type of enzymes and ability to break down certain foods that have evolved with the human race during that time. Right? So look at it this way. I mean, the universe, I think it's like 11 billion years old. The Earth, it's like 6 billion years old. The Earth has gone through 5 mass extinctions. And during that process, it's gone through very, very complicated changes in the soil that have given rise to the type of food we're able to eat today. All right? And the digestive system has evolved to deal and be able to assimilate that type of food into observable energy calories to be able to survive. Because in a sense, that's all the role is of the central nervous system, to get you to survive better in the external world. Space and time isn't even relative. It just exists when the central nervous system is there to observe the external world and has evolved to help you accumulate calories in a more productive way. Space, the central nervous system uses to determine if I need to run 5 miles to acquire 10 calories, is it worth it? Or can I go after this deer that's a mile away, burn less calories and acquire more calories in return? Same with time, how much time would it take me to close that distance, and do I have enough calorie reserves to be able to do that? Okay, so space and time is not fundamental. It's just there when this human central nervous system is there, and obviously that's another huge shortcoming of the scientific method. It's reliant on space and time. It's reliant on objective observation, but objective observation is done through the central nervous system, human central nervous system. But that human central nervous system can just see a glimpse, a distant abstraction of what's really out there, like a dumbed down version, as Donald Hoffman would use a perfect example. When you look at your desktop, you have that word icon, that blue W. Okay, that's just an interface that allows a user to interact with it. But that document doesn't look anything like that. The code is very complicated, and maybe even just a few handful of master computer programmers can even decipher what's in it. Okay, but what the central nervous system does is take that complicated code and simplify it into a friendly user interface, that word icon where you can type and you can, write a resume and get a job. For why? To help you survive better, which is the only purpose of the central nervous system. All right, guys, so this is how I look like literally all year round, like no steroids, lifetime steroid and hormone free, no medical drugs, nothing, okay? So for those of you that are aesthetically inclined, this is good skin tone, good hair tone, like perfect muscle to fat ratio all year round, okay? And I mainly rely just on pasture-raised meats, wild fish, organic fruits and vegetables, water, tea, that's it. Don't eat any processed food. Don't have any junk. I tried as best as I can to stay away from any additives and preservatives. All I really eat is all I really drink for liquids is just filtered water and organic teas of various sorts, rarely even drinking coffee, right? I was like this for forever. Okay, so the consistency is there. So you can see you're able to maintain a good-looking, healthy, metabolically and hormonally healthy physique all year round. So you can see for metabolic health here, even at 40, it's like 900 nanograms per deciliter for total test. The average 20-year-old in their early 20s these days is probably at like 500, 600. Okay, it's because they're eating junk, they're not living life sustainably, and they're doing a bunch of other stuff wrong. Have a huge toxic load from eating a lot of this food that has a tremendous amount of biocides in it, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'm able to, functionally, for those that are interested, I'm able to climb mountains. Here's Delta Lake, Mount Fury, Mount Hua in central China, able to, farm and enjoy an outdoor lifestyle, do research and improve myself academically, graduate with straight A's from the University of California, Irvine, write books, et cetera, et cetera. So all possible with a few things, but one of the main pillars is just having a healthy diet that's not grown with a tremendous amount of chemicals, right? Here's my medicine cabinet, all the medical drugs I'm on. So organic, biodynamic food only, filtered water, organic teas, sleeping well, midday naps are great, using movement as medicine 4 to 5 days a week. I like training for aesthetics, but if it's not your thing, just find something that you like. Quantum psychology was huge for me, as presented by Stefan Walensky. This one I get a little bit of kickback on, but working 2 days a week. So I work 2 days a week. I do devote 2 days a week to continued studies, okay, continued research. So it depends on how you define these 2 days a week. And then the rest of the time I just spend with family, loved ones, sleeping, living a sustainable lifestyle, okay? Because the central nervous system, no absolutes, and you'll find an exception, maybe 1 out of every few thousand people, can't be working 50, 60 hours week after week. You're going to get burned out and run to the ground. And your immune system is going to be suppressed and be more susceptible to various cancers and diseases, etc. And it's a shocker, I know, but for most human history, most people were generalists, not even specialists, and they definitely didn't have a full-time job. That was pretty much 99% of human history, okay? They're just hunter-gatherers for the most part, definitely not clocking in 50 hours a week. Weekly baths, sometimes massages, steam rooms, etc. are huge too. Those are the main players. I do some other little things here and there, but these are the big players. This right here, just mastering these things, allowed me to do this, allowed me to look like this already for like 20 plus years straight, look like this all the time, perfect metabolic and hormonal health, et cetera, okay? Without needing to take a bottle of antidepressants first thing in the morning just to be able to have enough willpower to go to work that morning, It's not the only one. Here are some examples of some clients who did the same exact procedures on 61 years old, 12 months down 100 pounds. What you don't see here is also he had 4 massive seizures before coming to me. Okay. And on top of that, he broke his foot on a fishing accident like 2 weeks before we were supposed to start the program. He wasn't even able to work out for the first like 2 to 3 months. We still got him to lose 30 pounds just by transitioning to organic food in a caloric deficit, of course, which is key. All right. And his sleep apnea went away. Digestive issues went away. Low back pain went away. Able to enjoy an active outdoor lifestyle. He loves fishing. I'm getting back into it too. Here's another perfect example of a client that was basically like pre-diabetic. Okay, 52-year-old male, 8 months, completely different aesthetics. Lost a decent amount of weight. A1C back to normal. Again, 6 years old, down 60 pounds off 9 medical drugs. Boom. He was on this for forever. And he actually was a client that came into me during the peak of COVID. And we had nothing but bands to work out with. Okay, bands, and he had a park nearby, and we went for nature walks 2 days a week. Still able to do this at 60 in 6 months. Another client, 52 years old, 5 months, down 25 pounds, 100% off 5 medical drugs. Boom, no longer type 2 diabetic. Another client, 42, 6 months, down 40 pounds. Look at these markers. This was done completely drug-free. Okay, look at these triglycerides. This is like a death sentence, 393 down to 122 in 6 months. Okay? Come on, you guys. And the coolest part, honestly, in my opinion, was he climbed Kilimanjaro at the end of the transformation. That was like super cool, in my opinion. I was so happy that he did that. But he went from extremely sedentary, terrible blood work, low back pain to boom, climbing the tallest peak in Africa. Another perfect example, diabetic, type 2 diabetic here, long time. Just started to transition to eating real food, decreasing her toxic load. Boom, 125, no longer type 2 diabetic. Another example, more of like an aesthetically inclined client, but that was on high blood pressure medication for a while, but no longer. Yet another example, 55-year-old client, off of his blood pressure and high cholesterol meds. More of like an aesthetically oriented client, aesthetically. This client is cool. He went and took a swim in the Antarctic, man. Now that is cool. This is the definition of health and wellness. This is what it's all about, man. Aesthetically inclined client. It's another 50-year-old male, very busy businessman. Night and day difference, okay? So you guys, if you want to learn more about this, here are real experts that are actual experts in the field, okay? Check out all of these people. They're mentors to me in one way or another, directly or indirectly, okay? They laid the foundation for me to accelerate my learning, and they can help accelerate your learning as well, okay? Very generous with their knowledge also. I think this is, let's see. Got 2 more guys here, researchers here. Tyrone Hayes, thank you very much for your work, appreciated. Ruben, I did a podcast with him. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to do that with me, and for streamlining the learning process for me, because he's the one that initially did the ground level research on complete formulations versus active ingredients in isolation on their own. So without that, I mean, I don't know how I would have even gotten that information. So thankful for both of these guys a tremendous amount. And I know I'm going to get a bit of pushback from these data influencers saying, well, Eugene, not everyone can afford eating organic or whatever. And here's a podcast I did on how to use your money to get out of a life of obesity, misery, and disease. And I break down the math very straightforward. All right. So the average American does spend $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses every single year, which is already far more than an all-organic diet would cost. So the money is there. Just the problem with the American culture is they've normalized mental and physical pathology to the nth degree. It's so common these days. People think it's normal, but it's not normal at all. It's not normal to be overweight and on a bunch of medical drugs and having orthopedic issues like early in life at all. Okay, guys, check that one out. The money thing, there are no absolutes. Maybe one out of a few hundred cases, it is truly a money issue. But for most people, it's a core values issue. They're already spending the money fueling their obesity and misery. They just need to redivert that money to being healthy and happy, okay? Because remember, you guys, being overweight takes a lot of time, money, and effort. It doesn't happen overnight. That's important to remember. It takes a lot of money, time, and effort. And it's important to be honest with that. If you guys want to see exactly what my diet looks like, check out this episode right here. I literally outline it perfectly, okay? And if you want to understand like what a root cause model of healthcare looks like, I did this presentation at the Four Corners Gathering, okay, I think in 2023. Please feel free to check it out by searching this right here. And then for other resources, you're welcome to check out my website. I have over 161, I think, episodes now, interviewing various experts and just giving away a tremendous amount of healthcare that actually freaking works to make you healthy instead of drowning you in medical drugs, okay? So here's some takeaways from this presentation. So pesticides are never tested for safety as a complete formulation, which is how they're used. Pesticides are never tested as cocktails. No testing for synergy. Toxicity of pesticide metabolites never tested. Effects on fetus, newborns, and growing children never tested. Never tested for endocrine disruption. Developmental neurotoxicity never tested. Intergenerational effects on all organs and systems are never tested. Organic pesticides rarely used in organic farms, but when they're used, I described what they are, vinegar and water or copper, come on. Studies can be found to support almost any viewpoint. Be careful with coming to a concrete conclusion with seeing even one study, even seeing a meta-analysis on that topic, okay? You got to get out there in the field and see what's happening on the ground. Ask yourself the basic common sense. Ask these basic common sense questions, guys. Come on, critical thinking. The bigger picture is, you guys, unfortunately, in the Western culture, but especially like in America, Australia, mental and physical pathology, unfortunately, has been normalized so much, so much. And it's a mind virus that unfortunately is destroying countries, destroying people's lives, increasing misery by a tremendous amount, bankrupting people. In the US, 80% of personal bankruptcies are due to health issues. All right. And it's these same people that say they don't have money to shop organic or get a gym membership, but they're spending $8,000 to $16,000 a year on non-essential expenses every single year. It's silly. They're just coming to these conclusions because of lack of education and what I'm referring to as a mind virus, which is a belief system that leads to certain behaviors over a long period of time that lead to a life of obesity, misery, medical drug dependence, and disease. Okay. And again, it takes a lot of time, money, and effort to make yourself overweight. It doesn't happen overnight. And we just need to start having an honest discussion that, like, hey, all these chemicals in our food, all this shit food, all these medical drugs, all of these overweight people, it's not normal. And we need to get back to more of like a sustainable lifestyle model that's better for the planet and each individual person. Check this out. Here's what this mind virus is doing to the planet. The mind virus that doesn't facilitate health conscious choices. They buy this shit food that's raised in these industrial operations with a myriad of biocides, beta agonists, antibiotics, animal cruelty, labor issues. Then all those chemicals run off into the streams. They get into the oceans. Because the earth is an enclosed ecosystem, obviously, then they get into the clouds. Then it rains everywhere. It gets back to the person gets sick. They get on medical drugs. They make these people rich. Then when these companies have had enough, polluting the earth, they sell the company, become millionaires, and then the taxpayer is stuck with the cleanup and their obese bodies that are not serving them in any way, like any positive way. Come on, you guys, we got to start waking up, and this is not normal, okay? This is not normal, and it's not helping that person or helping anyone around them at all. And let's look at this final message from a great role model
degree or a PhD, you take them into the field, and they literally don't believe anything unless there's a peer-reviewed paper. It's the only thing they accept. And you say to them, but let's observe, let's think, let's discuss. They don't do it. It's just, is it in a peer-reviewed paper or not? That's their view of science. I think it's pathetic. Gone into universities as bright young people, they come out of them brain dead, not even knowing what science means. They think it means peer-reviewed papers, etc. No, that's academia. And if a paper is peer-reviewed, it means everybody thought the same, therefore they approved it. An unintended consequence is that when new knowledge emerges, new scientific insights, they can never, ever be peer-reviewed. So we're blocking all new advances in science that are big advances. If you look at the breakthroughs in science, almost always they don't come from the center of that profession. They come from the fringe. The finest candle makers in the world couldn't even think of electric lights. They don't come from within. They often come from outside the breaks. We're going to kill ourselves because of stupidity.
All right, guys. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope the information I provided fast tracks your journey and allows you to make better decisions for yourself. And I'm hoping that by making these videos, we spread more awareness to influencers, and that way they spread more accurate information based off real world data, and that way people can become healthy and happy again, because right now it's not the case for pretty much all people in the Western world, with, again, 9 out of 10 people being metabolically sick, right? So we can't keep doing what's not working, because it's not going to all of a sudden work. That's just not how it's going to work, It's like so obvious common sense, but I hope this helps, okay? I'm wishing you guys the best and wishing you guys good health, okay? Take care.